just trying to do all the things in life. I was trying to be perfect career woman, super mum to these babies. And then, fast forward just a little bit in time, I was then president of the P&C at school and running the canteen there, and just had like every ball in the air until they all dropped.
There is rarely a life untouched by hardship or challenge. On this podcast, we invite our guests to share their very personal stories. We harness the wisdom and resilience of our guests, which has shaped who they are today.
Carl Rogers said, "That which is most personal is in fact most universal. Together we'll be inspired to embrace the resilience in our own stories and to gain strength in the face of adversity and have a few laughs along the way."
Hi, I'm Donna.
And I'm Di. We are the Double Ds, and welcome to the Discovery Diaries.
We acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation as the traditional custodians of the land on which we are recording this podcast. We pay our respects to the elders past and present and acknowledge their spiritual connection to family and storytelling.
Both Donna and Di were born here on these lands. We are grateful to draw on the culture of telling and sharing stories, and we hope that you will draw inspiration from the stories that are shared here.
This episode includes a discussion about emotional and mental abuse. This is an incredibly important topic, but if you feel like it's too much for you to listen to right now, or you would like to listen with somebody else, please come back to this episode when you are ready.
In this episode, we are with Rebecca Beardsley, founder of Untitled Co. Rebecca works with like-minded, hungry and fervent leaders to make their mark in the world and impact in their life and business. Rebecca combines 30 years of experience as a marketing and business development professional, and she's going to share with us some of her experience of her own journey of overcoming extreme adversity and trauma, having experienced corporate burnout and domestic abuse, physical, emotional and financial, and her life to a partner with addiction for more than 2 decades. It's a compelling listen. In 2021, amidst COVID lockdown and homeschooling, Rebecca took bold steps to redesign her life, taking leaps to fulfil her dreams. It was no easy feat, finalising the dissolution of her marriage, finding her own sense of belonging, ending her corporate career to become a founder, and single-handedly moving interstate with her 2 children, a deliberate and brave move to shift from surviving to thriving. Rebecca is now a solo mum, a business owner and deeply passionate about women's leadership. So we hope you enjoy this episode where Rebecca is going to share more about who she is and her new work in the world. So Beck, we're so chuffed that you're here with us, and I'm trying to think how we actually met, and I think it was online. You were still working and living in Sydney.
Yes.
I think I just arrived back from the UK, and through mutual friends and colleagues, I think we had, I think I was going to deliver something on the Inner Critic as an online workshop or something.
Oh my God,
do you remember that?
I'd forgotten all about that. I thought that we'd met. Fast forward in time. We'd met. It was Whitwire Conference 2020, I think. During COVID, I was in Sydney and you were here in Perth, and I was looking for awesome speakers to come and join our week-long virtual conference.
Yeah, and so I do remember you, Beck, and I just remember you had a beautiful presence about you.
Thank you.
And tell us a bit about the kind of work where your career's taken you up to that point in Sydney.
So up until that point, I'd worked, at the time, I was head of marketing and business development at Raise, which is a intellectual property firm nationally, but headquartered here in WA. And so up until that point, I'd been in that role, and then prior to that I was 23 years in senior BDM positions at a global firm, DLA Piper. It was a national firm when I had joined. I was straight out of high school and didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life or my career, but
join the club.
I had watched a lot of LA Law growing up with my dad and had this kind of vision that I was going to land myself in one of those law firms doing something fun but intelligent, and worked my way through secretarial ranks and found a love of marketing and business development and client relationship management, and kind of worked my way through there, and then made the jump to raise into that position.
So if I take you back a little bit to kind of that early part of your career, how many women were around when in that sort of world?
It's an interesting question because there were lots of women in the organisation, obviously, because most of the secretaries are women. In fact, if there was a male secretary, there would not be. And to give some context, DLA, at the time that I worked there were 500 people in the Sydney office alone, so big organisation, lots of women, but in leadership positions it was predominantly men. I think, if you took maybe a partnership of perhaps 40 people in the Sydney office at that time, there's probably only like 3 or 4 were females. The rest were men. And so as I kind of continued on my career path and moved, particularly when I moved into marketing and business development roles, I was usually the only female around the boardroom table, most junior and only female.
And do you remember what that felt like?
Yeah, I do. Very, very, very intimidating. And especially as I transitioned from being seen in the business as a secretary to being seen in the business as what they called a professional member of staff.
I've got so many questions just about that.
Yes, there were professionals and non-professionals, which always irritated me and insulted me at the same time. And I do remember feeling really intimidated and really having to kind of stand my ground on a lot of things, but not knowing how to do that and navigate that. It was often assumed that I would take the notes and I would get the coffee and I would make sure the lights were at the right,
I was I'm also from a very male-dominated industry, and I can certainly relate to being one of the only few women, especially in leadership positions.
Yeah.
And Beck, what was the kind of your strategy at that time? Were you aware of even having a strategy about how am I going to do this?
No, I wasn't. I definitely wasn't aware. But what I did realise was there were a couple of things that worked for me. One was getting male allies before I went into those meetings, so having the right conversations before I went in, so being a bit strategic about that, particularly if I wanted to influence and get things over the line. But then the other thing that I noticed was that when I spoke, the room listened, and that wasn't always happening when the men spoke in the room. And I put that down to the fact that perhaps I was communicating differently, and I started then to use that difference to my advantage. And then that worked incredibly well in my favour as a coach as well, because part of being a BDM in a law firm is coaching young professionals, so young lawyers and mid-tier, no, not secretaries, young lawyers, mid-tier lawyers and new partners to the business or up-and-coming partners on how to obviously grow their work and win client work. But because of the way law firms are structured, there's a lot of internal coaching as well. And so I found that in my work with them as a BD coach, I was able to take those learnings and really help them to thrive and move forward and succeed, both internally in their career progression but also externally in growing their practices.
And you talked about I realised that there was something about my communication that maybe was different. Can you tell us a bit more about what you were noticing? What's the difference?
I think that I developed a skill to really listen to what was being said with words and actions and body language, and then be able to succinctly package that and deliver that back in a way that resonated with everybody in the room. And I was also, I think, able to gently influence in a non-aggressive way that was sometimes, sometimes there would be combativeness going on around that table and a bit of ego that would come. But for me, there was none. So I was able to kind of gently manoeuvre through those conversations and lead the discussion so that we had really good positive outcomes by the end of the meeting. And I did also find that I was probably more action orientated as well, which is a bit odd because that's less leading into your feminine edge than it's a bit more masculine. But I was always able to bring that conversation back to what do we want to get out of today and what are the things we're going to take out of this session to keep it valuable. Yeah.
It sounds quite an innate thing for you, or did you have some role models or even at home, did you have role models who were showing you that way of communicating?
No, definitely not. No. I think probably it was a learned skill over time from a young age. And I didn't even know about it until it was probably when I got to Raise actually that I really knew about it. And the way that I knew that was the CEO at the time, he started really advocating for me to go into client meetings, and that wasn't really what was done by a non-professional. Because it's the same lingo, right?
Yeah.
And he explained that he felt that I had exceptional listening skills and started to put me into client meetings as an observer and a listener.
Interesting.
Yeah, so then I would sit in smaller and bigger meetings and I didn't have to really say very much, and which was kind of good because I was a bit worried because I didn't have that legal technical background and I thought maybe I shouldn't be there. But then my role and my goal was to sit and gather as much data as possible of what was being said, both overtly and as an undercurrent, and come away from that and share that with, the collective that were responsible for growing that client. And
it must have been, you must have learnt so much getting that opportunity.
I did. I loved it because I got great insight into what the client's world looked like as well. And up until that point, there was such a brick wall between, what was happening inside the business and what's happening outside of the business. And I think as a marketing and BD professional, it's really hard to add value to a conversation and to be able to give insight into how can you coach people what conversations to have outside of the business if you're not out there outside of the business knowing what conversations are being had. So that was an enormous learning for me. And then that put me in a better position to really kind of spot those opportunities and look at how we as a business could go forward in a much more successful way to clients.
Do you find, I find it very interesting when you meet with clients or stakeholders because they often will say something, this is about X, but you can sense that it's not. It's really about something else, something kind of deeper that they can't really say. Did you find that as well?
Yes, I definitely saw it in the client work, but I really picked up it in my coaching work and still do. So often, it's not uncommon for lawyers and partners in particular to come to, regular BD meetings. They have their plan, you have regular catch-up calls and they come to those meetings and they feel really deflated because they haven't completed their tasks, and you ask them why and they'll say things like, I haven't had time, or, so-and-so wasn't available, and there's all these what I would call just excuses. And I think over time I just got a bit braver in peeling back the layers because, as you say, there was always something else sitting underneath that. And as I started to dig in to find out what those things were, particularly with women, it would be things like there would be resentment or a misalignment in values between what they wanted to be doing and what the business wanted them to be doing. Sometimes there would be fear in there because they didn't know how to do it or they didn't have the skills to do it or the confidence to do it. And so once you could pick up on that, that was enormously powerful.
Yeah, I'm really struck by the main component or one of the most powerful components of communication being listening.
Yes.
It's so underrated.
Yes.
And we need to do it so much as coaches, right?
Yes.
That's our bread and butter, is to listen deeply. But it's still so missing in terms of most of our communication, what we actually see, from the boardroom to, home life, wherever
Enormously.
that is.
Yeah. I think that so much can be missed, particularly at the home life. So much can be missed in a dynamic when there's not effective listening taking place. Yeah.
So you're well down the track in your career,
Yes.
Beck, and this I guess, part of our series with this podcast is to think about, the notion of courage and to think about the notion of resilience, whatever that means for you.
Yes.
But when I start to use those words, what comes up for you with your career at the stage that it was at?
Certainly, when we think about courage, I think that was definitely needed at that kind of turning point of career. So for me, I think of myself as having career point 1.0 and now career 2.0, and I'm in 2.0 now, which started, it's almost 3 years ago now when I started Untitled Co. So I think that took enormous amount of courage to do that. If you think I was 28, 29 years down the track in a very, very solid career, single mum of 2 kids in Sydney, and just taking this great plunge to leave all of that behind and start all over again. So I think enormous courage was needed for that.
What sort of led you to wanting to do that, to set up your own business when your career was going well by the sounds of it?
I just wanted more. I think for a very long time I'd had this kind of notion in the back of my mind that I wanted my own business of some kind, and I'd dabbled in a couple of things, a few years prior, but they weren't really the right thing for me. And I just always just had this feeling that I wanted to kind of be my own boss, and I wanted to make my own decisions about things, but I also wanted to serve clients in the way that I wanted to. I didn't want to have to ask for any permission on that anymore. And then there was a sequence of events that happened around that time, and it was around the time that we met, Di, that just, it was like all the dominoes were just stacking up for me to be able to make that decision to do that. And then there was some I kind of reached a point in career as well where I was just feeling a bit gritty going to work each day, and I wasn't able to bring my best self to that anymore. And I knew that was time to take that step.
So when you did take that step, did you kind of one day you were working in a paid job and then the next day you quit and you started this business with no income?
Yes.
Yeah. Wow, that would have been a pretty frightening thing to do.
Yeah, it was. I was like, Jesus, am I stupid or brave? Like, I don't really know. And sometimes I still question that because, they talk about the valley of death of an entrepreneur, and I'm in the thick of it. But
I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing with you in a kind of like, I relate kind of way.
Look, I was also smart about it too. I knew that, I wasn't going to sit there with no income and, and kids to care for and all that kind of thing. So I just knew I had to restructure my client base. So for me, it was important to get an annuity client on the books immediately that would allow me to then grow my client base around that. And that's the step that I took. But it was pretty much an instant decision, yes.
Was it harder to make the decision or harder to, once the decision was made, did that then kind of become easier? Or was it getting to the decision that was the hard bit, or were neither of those things hard?
Neither were hard.
Interesting.
Yeah, I felt like I'm the kind of person though that I'll put up with things for a certain amount of time, and then once I hit that threshold, it's like bang, stop, and I'm done, and then decisions made and all those actions that are needed are put into place really, really quickly to get things moving.
They do say, if you kind of burn the boats, there's no option. Like if you quit your job and you haven't got any income, that is a very good incentive to get stuff up and running.
Yes. So I did get the annuity client on board first. It was kind of like spinning plates, but it all happened within a 3-week period. Of making the decision and then getting that client and then resigning and building my brand and going out to market.
And again, if we kind of follow through, I mean, one of the definitions I love around resilience is this ability to access our resourcefulness.
Yes.
And sometimes we don't actually realise how resourceful we are.
Yes.
But also there's a lot of stuff that can get in the way of our resourcefulness. And I'm thinking of anxiety and stress and overwhelm
fear.
and some of these, fear, like you mentioned. Was there some aspects of that for you that were at play?
A little bit, a little bit. And there still is in some ways because as, Untitled Co now looks very different to what I anticipated Untitled Co to look like. I thought at the time it would just be doing business development and marketing work, but consulting with many clients and working with lots of different brands, which was really exciting prospect for me and still is. But now it's evolved into all of these other areas and it involves doing things like this. And I think, who am I to be talking about my life and, my story? And
who are you not to be, Beck?
And so there's some fear. There's a bit of fear and blockers in the way of that from time to time. Like I really struggle with social media. I'm like, what the hell am I going to put out there today? Because, as a business owner and if it's your brand, you've got to be the front face of that. And I just think, oh my God, what would the judgment be around that? Yeah, so there's some fears definitely around that.
I can so relate to that. I'm so relieved to hear that there's other people who don't enjoy the social media side.
Yeah, I really don't at all.
This podcast is brought to you by my weekly newsletter, which is Donna's Balcony Views newsletter. This is a short weekly free newsletter that I write with the theme of building resilience and improving wellbeing. It contains 2 things I've experienced, 2 things I've learnt from others, such as speakers, podcasts, books or articles, and a personal story from someone else about what they do for their resilience or their wellbeing.
What I love about your newsletter, Donna, is it's really bite-sized and it's extremely easy to read. In a couple of minutes, I've got some great resources and some little tips that I might try. And I read it this morning again and it just gave me some idea of what I could focus on, some morning questions and some evening questions, and I'm really enjoying it.
If you would like to sign up for my weekly newsletter, my free weekly newsletter, go to my personal website, which is www.donnasbalconyviews.com.au or on Instagram at Donna's Balcony Views.
Beck, I know you a little bit and
Yes.
You've told me a little bit about a point in your life where you've used the word burnout, and
Yes.
I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what led to that and what was that like for you? Why even the term burnout?
Yeah. And you asked me a few moments ago about resilience as well, which I didn't yet come to. But so I think, working in the environment that I did, that firm was an amazing firm to have a career, and I would recommend that to anybody. But I think, at that particular time in history, you kind of reach burnout when you're working in a law firm like that. Like the expectations are really, really high. And if you're someone like me who's a bit of a perfectionist as well and you want to be succeeding, then you put on an extra layer of expectation on yourself. And the business at the time was going through an enormous amount of change. So we were shifting from being national firm to global firm, changing brand in the market. Incredibly exciting for me and for others in the business. But with that came really, really long hours. And so some nights I was working until, 3 or 4 in the morning and then back in the office at 8 or 9 the next day. And I had 2 really young children as well, like they were 4 and 1.
Tiny.
Yeah, babies. And the business was really supportive. But then there were sometimes individuals within the business that were not supportive. And so the expectation of them was, well, you want to be successful in your career, so you'll do it like I do. And so therefore you'll be on your phone available to me 7 days a week and messaging on a Sunday to, tell me to look at things ready for Monday morning. And it was just this kind of constant, I'm going to say like a barrage of requests like all the time. And at that point in time, I wasn't great at boundary setting either. So I did reach a point where I reached burnout, and I think I was 38 at the time. So, and just trying to do all the things in life. I was trying to be perfect career woman, super mum to these babies, And then, fast forward just a little bit in time, I was then president of the P&C at school and running the canteen there, and just had like every ball in the air until they all dropped.
So how did you know you were experiencing burnout? What actually happened to you?
I was training really heavily at the time as well. So like boot camp type training, like really intensely, and I'm not a fitness person at all, but at that point in time I could do something crazy like 120 push-ups in a minute. Yeah, it was insane. So training very regularly, like 4 or 5 times a week, but I really noticed it. That was when I first noticed it, because I was trying to do the most easiest of things, and I just couldn't do them. And I remember one day I tried to do something and my body fell out from under me and I started crying, and I didn't understand what was going on. And that was sort of in around like the March, April period. And then I just got slower and slower and slower at everything, and I got really like just this enormous sense of overwhelm all the time. And then brain fog started creeping in, and then mistakes at work started creeping in, and then like just feeling kind of removed from myself, if that makes sense. So then by the time September hit, I just woke up one day and I couldn't get up anymore. And I was like that for, I'm going to say, about 3 weeks. And I went to the doctor and I said, I think there's something seriously wrong here. And that's when we kind of came to that conclusion.
And Beck, it's a really, important part of your story, I imagine, and important, I think, for our listeners to understand and hear that. What I hear you describe as, you become almost detached from yourself.
Yes.
You stop feeling into who you are and how you are. Was there any support around you at the time? Was anyone else noticing?
No. So I was obviously married at the time, so I had my then husband, and he could see that things were wrong, but he didn't really understand what was wrong with me. And no, I didn't have any family living. Like I had my dad there, but you see Dad once a week and it's like, hi Dad, with a smile, and everything's normal. And for me that would just have been like the ultimate embarrassment to let the outside world know that I was feeling like that as well.
It sounded like, from what you said, in your job there was many, many nights where you didn't get anywhere near enough sleep, and especially with young children and everything.
Yeah, because even on a normal day, I was leaving the house, I think I would drop them at daycare at 7 a.m. and I'd get back home at like 7 p.m. or something in time for breastfeeding my youngest, put them to bed and do story time and whatnot, and then get to bed myself at probably about 10, but I was still feeding them as well. But they were up in the night, and I remember I was still having nights at that point where they were in separate bedrooms, but they would both wake up, and so I would sleep on the floor in the hallway like most mums do on those crazy nights. And, you're going from room to room, but yes, that was that was on a work night.
Yeah. And so once you couldn't get out of bed,
yes,
and you went to see a doctor to get some help,
yeah,
what kind of strategy did you put in place to recover from the burnout?
So I think my doctor clued on to there was probably something more behind this, which she didn't let on to me at the time, but she suggested I go and see a psychologist, which I was like, I don't need a psychologist.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I was like, what on earth for? Like, why were you – seriously.
Nothing wrong, nothing to see here.
Nothing to see here. I thought you were going to tell me I could have another week off and a cup of tea. Anyway, I reluctantly went and did that. And but there were some really basic things to start with, like, getting a good night's sleep and eating 3 meals a day again, because I wasn't doing that, and some very basic self-care things, and just slowing down, removing a little bit of responsibility at work. And when I think back, like, my anxiety level was really, really, really high. Anyhow, went and saw this psychologist. She's a beautiful lady, and I ended up seeing her for 5 years. And so my one visit, ended up being a really long time because we kind of dug into a few things over the course of time and, we realised that there was a bigger picture at play.
And Beck, a lot of people kind of do bandy this word burnout around, and there's something in us that almost kind of does everything to avoid it until we can't avoid it anymore.
Yes.
Speaking from experience as well.
Yes.
And yet somehow then our body says, no more.
Your body always tells you. Every single time there is something wrong, your body always tells you. I nearly reached it again last year, and it was because I knew what those symptoms were, and I was like, this is a familiar feeling. I know exactly what I need to do now. But the second those stress levels get to where they're not supposed to be, and I don't think it was that burnout was reached. There was obviously stuff going at home, which I know we're going to come to. There was that. There was being mum of 2 young children. There was not enough self-care. There was really high expectations in the business. But I also think that, we talk about male-dominated workspace, and I really believe that as a woman, when you're not in your natural state of your feminine energy, then that sends you, if you're not in that, most of the time, then that can send you into high stress state and you don't even realise either. And I think that was part of it as well. I think it was a lot of things.
I think our listeners will be really keen to understand what you mean by being in your feminine energy. And I know that that's part of how you now use your business. Tell us a bit more about that, Beth.
I think sometimes when we're interacting with men, we feel either consciously or subconsciously that we need to be like them. And we don't. I think that we feel that we need to be really outcome driven and action orientated and at the speed that they're doing things. And I remember I used to have this one boss, and he'd walk through and he'd click his fingers all the time, and that was the pace that was then being set. Yeah. So then that was the pace that I was trying to set. And I think that just the way men inherently, I think, do think differently, and I love that. But I think that as women, we need to allow ourselves to pause and to kind of lean back into what might be considered a little bit. Some people would say I'm a bit woo-woo, but I don't think I am. But I think more into that kind of gentler, and it doesn't mean being a pushover, but just listening more and being more considered and creative and doing the things that bring out the best in us.
It's so interesting because that takes me right back to where you started, which is I added this amazing value because I listened.
Yes.
Because I brought a particular kind of energy into the space which spoke for itself.
Yes.
Because then you got asked to do more. Then and then somehow, did it get lost, or was there something that you had to regain or retain to come back to that space?
So I think definitely the work I was talking about earlier, where I was leaning into that more, that was later in career. So 2 different work environments, different managers bringing out different aspects of me, but also my maturity levels at different stages of life as well, and me being more self-aware and I guess knowing what nurtures me more.
Yes.
Yeah. So for me, going through an era of time where I was putting on that kind of standard black shoulder pads pantsuit and being at that kind of grey desk every day, just was not me.
For our listeners, Beck is wearing a gorgeous spotty dress with a gorgeous mauve jacket. There's colour, there's life, there's movement. It doesn't look corporate black,
which would have been completely inappropriate in that environment, and for obvious reason. But I think then that next role that I moved into, it was a much more creative role, both and I don't always mean artistically creative, but strategically creative as well. And there was much more freedom to move, and still very male dominated. But I kind of learned by that stage to use that to my advantage.
I'm really curious about the use of male allies. You talked about, how you aligned yourself.
Yes.
Can you give us an example of what that looked like that still kind of felt authentic for you?
They're the guys that have got you back when you're not in the room. There's no, they're the ones that are elevating you to, be in that boardroom and have those discussions and have a say. They're the ones that are encouraging you to go further for yourself, and that are fighting the fight for you with others in the business to get what you deserve.
It strikes me as not a dissimilar thing where sometimes we put cultural load onto people who, Indigenous people or, people of colour. Sometimes we sometimes put that same load onto women.
Yes.
And so, to hear how men are supporting the space and allowing women and actually championing them, it's got to be part of the way forward, right?
I don't think we can move forward if we don't have men as part of that conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting with this sort of bang, bang, clicking the fingers type thing, and because I've worked in places with people like that as well, and I think there's some positives in that you get stuff done, but you can lose a lot as well because it's almost like the task becomes more important than the people.
Yes.
And I think that's a real shame, and then you don't really feel like you get to know the underlying motivators and factors and things like that, especially with clients and things. So and with other people in the team. So yes, I find it it's very insightful what you said there.
I think when it starts to become more of a numbers game instead of a human game, that's when it becomes truly difficult.
This podcast is brought to you by my business, Coming Up for Air. That's coming up number 4, Air. This is a business which cultivates curiosity, compassion and courage through executive coaching, workshops and leaders' retreats. Donna, you've been to one of my retreats.
Yes, and I, as a senior leader, I decided to invest in myself and go for a day. It was on the weekend, a full day retreat. I'm so glad I did go. It was just what I needed in my life at that time. We spent time on our own, reflecting on questions that you gave us, Di. We spent time with others there, being creative, which I don't often get the chance to do in everyday life. And my absolute favourite part was spending some time with the horses that were on the property. The horses have such a calming effect, and I just left the retreat feeling completely rejuvenated and had time to think about some important life questions that you don't usually take the time out to think about.
Thanks, Donna, and I didn't pay her to say that. I do run retreats at various times through the year, which are open retreats, ideal for leaders, just as you said, Donna, to get away from the busyness of work and life, and often we don't take this time to invest in ourselves. You can find me on Instagram or at comingupnumber4air.com. And Beck, you have just started to touch on, there was some stuff going on at home, quite significant things going on at home, and we know that you don't live in Sydney anymore.
Yes.
What part of your story would you like to share with us around what was happening at home?
Well, if we think back to the time when I had started seeing that therapist, about 6 months into my time with her, and I was seeing her on a weekly basis at that point. And when you're seeing a therapist on a weekly basis, you know that there's some serious work that needs to be done there. So it took about 6 months until I disclosed to her that there were challenges in the marriage as well. And I think I, started to unfold that very, very, very slowly. And it was only a year or so after that she said that she was like, did you know that took 6 months for you to even say one bad thing that was happening, and that was the way that I was being treated at home and the dynamics that were in that house at the time. And I guess to kind of describe that in a nutshell, what that, by the time I then left that marriage, which was it's 5 years ago now, so it was a couple of years before I'd left my career as well. I'd been then with my husband by that time. By the time we separated, I'd been with him for 25 years. And for much of that time, he was a gambling addict and an alcoholic. And highly abusive as well, not just to me but to my children, although in the time at the marriage I thought that it was just me. I didn't know it was my kids as well, particularly my daughter. So I guess when you think about like at that point, like that's 20-something years already by the time I started seeing her, there's layers and layers and layers of stuff there as well. Yeah.
And we talked about this a little bit before, Beck, didn't we? And one of the ways I've described it is we get wired to people. We actually get energetically wired to people. What do you think about that concept?
Do you mean wired as in attached to people?
Yeah. So that there's a dynamic and a sort of energy that gets set up between us that actually it's really hard to see where we're separate.
Well, I think in that relationship, I'd been in that since I was 19. Yeah. So, and then 40-something when 43 when I left. So that's a really, really long time. Like that was 3/4 of my life. I'd been with this one person. That's a very hard thing to see when you're in it. Like for anyone that's been in that situation, they would probably agree with me that it doesn't start bad from day one, because if it did, then you wouldn't be there, and it's not bad every day, because if it was, you wouldn't stay. But I guess being out of it, I learned that much of what was happening was completely like not okay and really, really unhealthy. But because I was already in it for so long, I was just oblivious to it. And then in terms of being attached to people, like I couldn't even imagine what life would be like without having that person by my side every day, and for my children every day. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think now, like, if we're talking about energy, I can spot that immediately. Like I just kind of, as soon as I'm in the presence of a person that's like that, I can spot that really, really quickly. And I found that over time I now just gravitate to people with a completely opposite energy to that.
Yeah. I guess that's where it's safe, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, it is.
What was it? Because that would have taken enormous courage to do something about that relationship when you'd been in it for so long, and as you said, you probably weren't even realising.
No.
So what was there something that happened in particular that you said, right, that's it, and how did you get the courage to actually do something about it?
There was a couple of things that happened. I think in the course of my work with my therapist, she. And therapists don't normally do this. I mean, she advocated for the sanctity of the marriage for such a long time, but she started to kind of really get a window into how bad it actually was. And so she then tried to sort of coach me out of that. And one of the ways that she did that, because I was kind of adamant, I was like, I don't care how bad it is, I need to stay in that marriage for the sake of my children. And I remember her saying to me, but your children are really young, like they were 8 and 13 by the time I'd left. She was like, that could be another like 10, 15 years there. And I remember sitting on her couch and saying, yeah, that's okay, I'll wear it for that amount of time. I don't matter in this. Like I will have my work and I'll have my friends and I'll do whatever, and I'll just deal with that. And she's like, I just don't think you can, Beck. I think you need to start thinking differently. So then she started to do things with me to make me think differently. And I remember there were 2 exercises that she did that really stood out in my mind. And one was she got me to go home one day and write down a list of all of the things that I would love doing with my time and with my life if I wasn't in that situation. And what would really, really light me up. And imagine there was no limit on resources or anything like that. So I did that. And then and I was like, and I remember taking it in and reading it to her going, wow, like this is the best life ever. This is just so extraordinary. Imagine waking up every day and feeling that and experiencing that. And then the other thing she got me to do was she got me to map out like this grid for, I think we were then by, monthly visits together or whatever. So she mapped out a grid for the month of days, and she said, now I want you to put a marker on every day where you feel unhappy in that home. And then and I know why she did that. I'm a very visual person, so taking that back into her and looking at that grid with all these like black marks on it most days was just like really, really eye-opening. So that was happening. The dynamic was getting worse at that point as well, because it's almost like you can't unring a bell. Like once you see things, you start to see more of things, and your own self-awareness becomes higher, and your awareness of what's happening around you and the behaviours that are there be really like glaringly obvious to me at that point. And I'm not the kind of person that can't call things out either. So as I started calling things out, and she was really arming me with tactics on how to use this, because there was massive amount of narcissism and gaslighting and lots of belittling there that would just pull the rug out from under you. She would give me skills and tactics on how to deal with that. And there were, some days I'd just go back to session with her and I'd go, I just don't even know how I can deal with this. Like I can't even breathe when I walk in. And she'd give me visualizations like, imagine you've got like a snorkel on and you're underwater and the atmosphere is this pea soup, but you've got this snorkel that kind of gives you fresh air breathing in. And so there were things like that. And then I was getting tired of managing all of this. And but then there started to be bad behaviour in front of my kids. So up until that point, it really hadn't happened much in front of them. And I remember this one particular day, there was a massive fight and my little boy stepped out of another room and walked in and saw his dad with his dad had his hands on me. And my son saw it and I saw the look in his eyes, and in that split second I knew I will never, ever, ever allow that to happen in front of my children again. And that was when I decided to go.
Wow.
Mm.
It's very powerful, Beck, and it's happening all the time.
Yes.
To many women today.
Mm.
I think some of those strategies and techniques that you learn, that would be so helpful and useful for other people.
They're really empowering.
Yeah, and do you use some of those techniques in your work now to encourage people
I do.
And build resilience?
Yeah, I do. So that technique of, listing all the things that I would love to be doing is then, when we talk about that transition of going from corporate life to entrepreneur life, and what I would describe as my kind of life flip going from East Coast to West Coast.
We're very glad you're on the West Coast, Beck. We're very glad to have you.
I can't even tell you, like, I pinch myself every time I'm driving along Mountain Spade Drive. Like, it's just so beautiful. I feel so blessed. But I kind of took that for myself, and I remember a dear friend around that time as well had talked to me about this concept of life by design. And I was like, oh, hang on a minute. Like this is like when we're sitting and brainstorming, what would I like to be doing with my time? So I kind of took that plus my strategic planning side of me and moulded that together for myself. And so then now I use those strategies with my clients as well of, okay, if you want to take bold steps, let's not be scared about it. Let's kind of vision it and dream it and feel it and taste it to motivate us, but then also let's put some strategy and really kind of strong steps behind that to make it happen.
It's a great, fantastic example of how a really difficult situation in your own life, you somehow got through it, and the way you got through it was using these tools and strategies.
Yes.
And so now your strength from having got through it can help a lot of other people as well.
Yes.
Which is, that's a real gift in a way, being able to do that.
Thank you.
And Beck, I think for a lot of, the stories that we hear on this podcast are not necessarily stories of, and then everything was fine, like if only, right?
No, if only.
Yeah. So like it's this constant evolution of more courage and more learning. And what would your words be? More what? More of? More
doing. Like I always say to the way that I've done this for myself is to just always understand your own capacity, but then push yourself a bit further than that. Because I think if I always only operated at what I thought my capacity would be, then I might end up standing still. And for me, standing still is not an option at this point. We talked about kind of shifting from corporate to entrepreneur, but there was that shift as well from Sydney to Perth, and with no family or friends here and the 2 kids, just that. You asked me about resilience and courage before, like that took enormous courage. That was a massive, massive leap of faith because we hadn't lived here before. The kids hadn't even been here. I didn't know what that was going to be like. And when you say like it's not always how you expect it's going to be, it definitely was not. There were lots of reasons for coming here. One was I wanted business. I always wanted new life. I always wanted to see change out of the hustle and bustle that New South Wales was presenting to me at that time. And I wanted something slower for me and the kids, but I also wanted to be away from my ex-husband pretty much. Like I didn't want to be around that. My daughter had already cut ties with him at that point, and I could see that the only way that we were going to get some breathing space was to put some distance between us. So, I put a country between us, or so I thought, because then he followed us a couple of months after that. And so when we talk about things not going to plan, that didn't go to plan. My daughter then had what I would describe as a breakdown, and so she was in year 9 at that time. So that was our first year here. She was in year 9, had a breakdown. She could no longer go to school anymore, and she ended up with trauma-induced mutism. So that meant that she woke up one day and she had no voice, so not a sound coming out of her. So hadn't left the house for probably 3 months at that stage, and then no voice as well. And that was, we talk about the body telling us, that was her body telling us that she was in a severe state of trauma, that was catching up with her from what she had seen and experienced herself in the home. And I think it took us 9 months for her, working intensively together, her and I, with a therapist to get her voice back, and that was a beautiful day and moment. And so she's now year 11 and homeschooling and just like a normal, beautiful teenager. Yeah.
I can only imagine the sweetness of that sound when she began to speak again.
Yeah.
What was that like for you?
I was driving down St George's Terrace, and she was sitting in the back, and all of a sudden I just heard, Mama, Mama. And I pulled over. It makes me teary. It's so beautiful. And there's all this traffic and buses flying by, and I pulled over and I'm like, oh my God, did you talk to me again? Please say my name again. I'd missed it so much. It was extraordinary. I can't even describe. I can feel, it was like, the day when your babies are born, and you never forget that. I'd put it up there with that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
So, Beck, life isn't simple or straightforward going forward. It hasn't become perfect. We know you've pivoted a number of times in a number of ways. What do you want our listeners to hear from you in terms of how we draw down on our own courage?
I think it's a bit like the capacity and capability thing. Like you probably have a whole lot more than what you realise. And if you think that you don't have it, then speak up, because there'll be people around you who can help you find it or who can give you strength, because, those weakest moments when you think you've got nothing left in you, then if you can't find it in yourself, then someone else will help you find it for you.
Yeah, it's we're not meant to live in isolation, are we? Or
Definitely
to do this
not.
world, this life,
No.
this work, anything really.
No.
We're social beings, aren't we?
Yes.
So, Beck, how can people who are interested in learning more about your work and working in some of the courses and things that you do, how would people find you?
I'm hanging out, as much as I hate social media, I'm hanging out on LinkedIn quite a bit. So they can find me on LinkedIn or on my website, which is untitledco.com.au.
We have to ask Beck, where does the name come from?
Oh, okay. I love the story actually, and I love sharing it. So as a marketer, I was, trying to think of this really cool name too, because the pressure's on, right, for your brand and your name and all that kind of thing. And I thought, what am I actually doing for my clients? And I thought, what I would be doing for them would be helping them get their brand out in the market, whether it's a new brand or an existing brand that needs to be known in front of their target audience. And so my thought process went down that path. But at the same time, I was going through this transformation in myself where I'd gone from a sense of not really knowing who I was in the world anymore because I didn't have a wedding ring on my finger, and I was about to leave the safety of corporate life, and life just looked so differently as well, not as a nuclear family anymore. And it's for the first time ever, I don't really know who I am, and I feel really untitled. And so yeah,
there we go.
So
now the penny's dropped.
Yeah, so it's untitled. And the co, for me, I've always thought that anything I do in work will be about community. So for me, the success of my business will only ever happen with great community around me that's supporting the communities that I'm working with as well. So it kind of made sense to be &Co.
We love that story, and we love that you've come and shared a bit of your story with us.
Thank you.
And we will share you in our community that we hope will grow as well. And we just wish you all the best and look forward to seeing you around the traps in Perth.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Donna.
Donna, we were just interviewing someone who'd spent a long time in a law firm, and that got us thinking, I work for a law firm, you nearly worked for a law firm, but what happened for you?
Oh, well, I did work experience at a law firm when I was in Year 10, and I did enjoy it, but there was something that I found very interesting, which Beck also commented on, the difference between the professional and the non-professional staff. And when I was there, which was a long time ago now, this particular law firm had the hierarchy of biscuits. So there was plain biscuits for the non-professionals, so the non-lawyers. The lawyers had, I think it was cream biscuits, and then the partners had the chocolate biscuits. So there was these different types of biscuits, and there was a tea person that would come around, make cups of tea and coffee, but you could only have the biscuits according to your rank. And I must admit, I thought, I don't know whether I really want to work in a place where there's a hierarchy of biscuits.